Hey guys, I'm Kristen from College Lead. I help students with planning high school courses and extracurriculars and also guide them through the college application process. Welcome to the next episode of Campus Conversations with College Lead, where I interview current students and recent graduates of different colleges to give you perspective of the different ways you can prepare for college and high school and also what different campus life is like. Today we have a very special guest, Edward. He is a recent graduate from Brown, and thank you so much, Edward, for being here. So I guess just to start off with, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi guys, my name is Edward. I'm originally from Queens, New York, born and raised, and I went to Brown, and I graduated last year, and I'm now in the DC area working as an internal consultant at Capital One. So at Brown, I studied computer science, though it was somewhat of a winding path to get there. I tried a bunch of stuff, and I think that's definitely been a theme throughout my educational career, both in high school and in college. I tend to try a lot of stuff before coming down to the thing that I like.
So let me just start off with asking about your high school experience. What extracurriculars did you do while in high school, and how did those translate to perhaps what you did in college?
Sure. So like I mentioned earlier, I tried a bunch of stuff in high school initially. In my freshman year, I was doing everything from like speech and debate to like a little bit of lab research to writing on the newspaper to doing this and that. So I think at one point I was doing something like 7 or 8 different activities. And clearly that wasn't that sustainable. So eventually I had to pick and choose. And I think in the end, I landed on like sort of 2 major areas. So the first was like a science and research piece, and the second was like a journalism and writing piece. So I got into like this really fun program at the Museum of Natural History. And what they did there was they paired high school students with researchers at the museum for a 3-year program. And while we were there, we'd work in the lab, we'd work behind the scenes at the museum and do a bunch of stuff there. So that was a really cool experience. And then the other big piece was I spent a lot of time writing for the school newspaper, and I also submitted a bunch of essays to various writing competitions and had some success there.
I think that is very interesting how your extracurriculars are focused on research, but then also very much on the creative writing end. And I know you mentioned earlier that you studied computer science at Brown, and I, having spoken to a lot of students, have gotten questions on what happens if my extracurriculars don't exactly line up with what I want to study in college. So maybe could you talk a little bit about that and how, I guess, you were still able to have all of these diverse interests, but also study a major that seems very different from what you did in high school?
Sure, yeah. So I think one of the nice things about Brown, and I think that makes it different from some schools, is that when you apply to school, you actually don't have to choose a specified major or a specified program, with the exception of like there's a program at Brown called PLME for med students. So if you want to become a doctor, that's the thing that you would do, and you can't really have too much flexibility there. But in most cases, in college, you list out like roughly what you want to study, but you're not wedded to that at all. So I actually did go into Brown intending to do like a double concentration in something like literary arts and like environmental science, because that was sort of what lined up with my activities in high school. But I think when I got to campus, I quickly realized that like I didn't necessarily want to go the distance to get like a PhD. That seemed like a lot of extra work and schooling, and I wasn't sure that I was committed to that necessarily. And at the same time, I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but I come from a first generation college student background. So also the prospects of like, just studying like English or writing or something like that was a little bit like unstable for me. It's not to say that I didn't enjoy those things, but I couldn't see myself pursuing those things professionally just for various personal reasons.
I definitely relate to the aspect of having to choose your major with what will give you the most return in terms of just salary or even career outlook. Because for me, I would have studied music if I wanted to, but I just saw this overall decrease in interest in classical music. Very sad.
Yeah.
Which is why I ended up choosing computational neuroscience. That was also something I was interested in, but I totally understand that process of having to find something to focus in. But as you mentioned, it doesn't necessarily mean you're never going to go back to creative writing. It sounds like, well, from knowing you as a friend, I often get a lot of book recommendations from you, and oftentimes you spend time on your Kindle still reading and engaging in all that material. So to any viewers out here, whatever you choose to study in college does not always have to be your only interest or activity. There's opportunities to still explore other interests outside of that. Earlier you mentioned that you are a first-gen college student. So could you maybe share, whatever you're comfortable with, of course, a little bit about that experience? What are some of the challenges you came across, and how did you overcome them?
Cool. So for those who are not familiar with the term, being a first-gen college student means that you're the first person in your family to go to college. So neither of my parents really had any formal higher education. My dad, didn't really go to college, and my mom had like some trade school experience, but like also was not a student at our like institutional college. So yeah, so like I think what that meant for me growing up was that there wasn't a ton of familial support or familiarity with the college application process. That was something that I had to figure out on my own, and something that I really leaned upon like my older classmates from high school on. So I watched their experience applying to colleges, and that was really informative as I was trying to figure out what my own process would look like. And I think one of the good parts of my high school was that it is a school that's like majority full of first-gen students, I would say, and majority people from low-income backgrounds. So I felt very comfortable. Like I knew that a lot of people were in a similar sort of situation as me. So I always knew that I could make it, but there was still definitely like a bit of a challenge in like finding the exact process and like the right steps to get there.
What resources are available to first-gen college students, and how did you find them? Maybe something like a scholarship.
Sure. So there are a number of like really great scholarship opportunities, some of which are like nationwide programs that a lot of people have heard of, some of which are more local things. So for instance, like a few of the big ones are the Coca-Cola Scholarship Program, the Questbridge Scholars Program, and the Bill Gates like scholarship program. So basically, most of these programs will cover either a significant portion or like the entirety of your college tuition costs. And like what they do is somewhat complicated, like behind the scenes. So they'll like work with the college that you get into to like figure out a financial aid package, and like the school will cover some of it, they'll cover the rest. So it's a pretty like fluid process between the scholarship provider and the college itself. So there are lots of resources like that I had learned about through either my college guidance counselor or through like classmates who had applied to similar programs. I also had applied to like a number of like local scholarship funds in New York, some of which were geared towards Asian Americans, others of which were geared towards first gen or low income college students. So I like picked and choose from a bunch of different places. So that's on the like college tuition side. I think I also leverage a bunch of resources to just like send out college applications, period. So like, I'm not quite sure what it's like these days, but previously when you submitted a Common App, you also had to like pay a like fee per school. And like, I applied to something like 17 or 18 schools, and those fees really added up to like several $100s. So what I did there was I applied to a scholarship to like waive some of those fees. I like used my guidance counselor as a resource to like talk with my high school to see if there's something that they could do about it. So I would say for current high school students, like if this is a problem that you're struggling with, like talk to someone about it. I think you'll be surprised by how many options there are to like address some of these various situations, and like don't let these like fees be a barrier to you applying to colleges that you might be interested in.
I very much agree with that. And I guess along those lines, what advice or words of encouragement do you have for any first-gen high schoolers who are watching this video?
Yeah, I guess the main thing would be just don't underestimate yourself. I know it's one of those things where like you hear a lot about some of these colleges, and like as a first gen student, because you're coming from a background where like your families haven't really had that historical experience of going to college, you might think that like, you know, you can't get into a really good school, or like you don't belong there. But what's important is to like not psych yourself out. Like you should apply, give yourself the best shot that you can, and then like, you know, I'm not gonna lie, like things can be difficult in college, and that's like a very honest thing that all of us should recognize. But like, you should not let that stop you from applying and trying. You can deal with those challenges as they come, but you really want to give yourself the best possible shot to succeed.
Thank you so much, Edward. I'm sure a lot of viewers will find that very encouraging. Going back to when you said your high school college counselor was a really great resource, what tips do you have for other students on how to build a strong mentor-mentee relationship with your college counselor, and broadly also with your other teachers for recommendation letters?
Yeah, I would say, I guess the main thing is like, just try to remember that your college counselors and your teachers are all like real people. I know that can be tough sometimes, especially if, you know, you don't have a natural like rapport, or if you don't like their teaching style. But at the end of the day, like they're people just like you and me. They're just like a little further in their lives and work. And you know, most people get into teaching because they want to help children, and they like want you to succeed. So I think like if you approach the conversations and that mentor-mentee relationship from that angle, you'll be able to like be more open to it. And by you being more open, I think teachers tend to respond pretty well to that. They know that it's like a difficult time for you as like a student, because like lots of things are happening. Like in high school, you're like, you know, entering puberty, you're like, you know, growing up, and like you're trying a lot of new things and dealing with a lot of like hard issues. And like I think all the adults in the support system around you should recognize that. And if you have good teachers and good counselors, they are going to be there for you. Of course, it's going to be different sometimes depending on your individual circumstance. Like some schools tend to be more crowded, and that was definitely the case in my experience. Like my class sizes tended to be like 30 to 35, and like we definitely had like not enough guidance counselors. We would have like, you know, I don't remember exactly, but something like 7 or so guidance counselors for like a school of whatever 3,200 people. And of course, like those counselors don't really interact with you until you know, junior senior year of high school, really. So it's not like they're working with all the students. But like I think the important thing for me was like trying to get in there early and like making a regular habit out of it, because I think some students treated the like college guidance counselor relationship as something as like a bunch of one-off experiences where like you would have to go like every once in a while as like a mandatory experience, and like it's hard to really build up a rapport if you're just there because you have to be there. So like, you know, in high school there were definitely a couple of experiences where I had like lunch with my guidance counselor, where I would just like check in to be like, have you heard of any experiences that like you think would be interesting for me? And yeah, like one thing I also want to like credit my family with is I think my mom and my guidance counselor were actually like somewhat, I'm not going to say close, but they definitely like knew of each other and had a bit of a rapport. So like my counselor knew like a little bit about my family, so that also equipped her to like better understand my individual circumstances and like tailor her message and advice. So yeah.
Awesome. Go mom.
Yeah.
Now moving on to college apps. Is there anything about the process of writing the college essays that you could share? Maybe in terms of picking what to write about specifically?
Yeah, so I think for me, the process was definitely very iterative. So I started writing it like the summer before I like applied to college, and like I had like a bunch of different ideas, some of which were good, some of which were like not so good. Um, and like at the time I worked with like a mentor through this like program that my high school had, where they would match students who were applying to colleges with like college graduates or like teachers who would serve as mentors during the college application process. So I worked with this woman named Agnes who graduated from, I think, Columbia Journalism School. So like she was a really great like mentor in that process, and she was a great writer, period. And like I think at the time she had been doing some sort of like advising maybe, or she had some sort of experience as like a college counselor or like a college like advisor. So it was sort of great just to get that inside perspective. And I recognize that like that's not something that a lot of students have at that time. So so I recognize that privilege, and I'm like very grateful for that, which is why, Kristen, I think this college lead thing is going to be really great, because you're going to give people access to things that like that, you know, are traditionally just like one-off relationships that not a lot of people have access to. So yeah, so like I brought a couple of like essay ideas and like short little paragraphs to Agnes, and I like kind of floated a bunch of ideas by her. And you know, she sort of sat me down and talked through like the mindset of a college admissions officer, and like that was really helpful, just to sort of just to sort of like humanize their experience as well. So like earlier I was speaking about how you have to remember that teachers are children. You have to remember that teachers are people too.
They're also children, but yeah.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, like college admissions officers are also people too, and they have a very stressful job in the fall, especially at schools like Brown. Like they're often reviewing like something like 35,000 applications as like an office of like whatever 15 or 20 people maybe. And of course, like, you know, there's some help from the Common App. There are like some automated systems that do some stuff, but like they still do have to read like a ton of essays, and like they can't spend too much time on each individual essay. So from that perspective, like you have to really think about the things that would make your essay stand out from the like huge pile that they have to sort through. So in my experience, I sort of really tried to highlight experiences that I thought were like unique to me, and like could sort of show off my personality. I think that a mistake that I made that I think like a lot of students make when writing their essays is like they tend to make it about like their families. And I think especially if you're coming from more of a like first gen background, or more of like a low income background, or a like, you know, first gen American background, where like, you know, maybe your family ties are super strong, your parents are like very invested, or like, you know, you feel like a lot of responsibility to them. Sometimes your essays can be about like, you know, like the family experience rather than your own experience. And I think that's ultimately a trap, because these college admissions officers, they want to know about you, like not your family necessarily. And they want to know how you as an individual are going to like contribute to the campus culture and the campus environment. So make sure it's about you. And yeah, ultimately just like take it as a long-term process. Like make sure you give yourself enough time to like really think and like try a bunch of things. You're going to need to write a lot. You're going to need to like go back to the drawing board. You're going to have to like discard a bunch of stuff, but you know, you should be getting better and better each time. So yeah, just like leave a bunch of time.
Could you maybe talk a little bit about what the admission officer perspective is like, from what you learned from Agnes, or even your own experience now having gone to college?
Sure. Yeah. So like, I think admissions officers are looking for like a number of different things. Like they have a pretty difficult job, honestly. They have to like try to create a like like holistic class culture. So like they have to make sure that the incoming class is diverse enough in like a number of different ways. So like, of course, there's racial diversity, but also there's class diversity. There is geographical diversity. They want to get people from all over the US and all over the world because that is what ultimately contributes to like a lot of learning on campus. So there's like a lot of stuff that's in the back of their heads. And like, I think to the extent where you can understand how you fit into that picture, that's really helpful. So I tried to make my own application like stand out. So just to give a concrete example, like I mentioned earlier, that I sort of split time between like the science world and the research world in high school and the like literary world. And I think that was a pretty like rare combination. We had like a lot of students who were really into science and math and like a lot of students who were really into like writing and the arts. But like not too many people who could do both. So I really tried to play that up to my advantage. And I think that like came across in like an interesting way. I think in one of my college essays, like I talked about how like science journalism is like really interesting to me because like, you know, you have to do this process of explaining science to people, and that's like a very different skill set from even just like doing science. So yeah, I tried to like leverage these things to my advantage. Just to tie this back in with our earlier conversations about like guidance counselors and how you should like work with them throughout the process. Like typically your guidance counselor will know a bunch of like admissions office like people at all these various colleges because there are lots of opportunities for them to like connect and interact. And like, you know, colleges will sometimes send representatives to schools to like give pitches and information sessions. So like if you have a pretty tight relationship with your college counselor, they can tell you like a little bit more about like what the college that you're applying to is like looking for and like the things that they want to see. And also like if your college counselor ends up like having to write a note about you or like write like a recommendation for you, like the admissions officers will like take their word more seriously if they sort of know that that counselor has a good relationship with you. So I think like I don't remember how this works exactly because it's been a while, but I think like my counselor ended up having to like write like a little bit about like each one of us to like some of the schools that we were applying to. You know, and like we had like a mandatory session where we would have to like talk about the things that we had done and like our goals for college and stuff like this. And like, because my counselor knew me, I think she could write very effectively about me. And by contrast, I think some other students who like didn't have that rapport with her got like a more generic blurb. So that definitely comes across to admissions offices as they're reading some of these blurbs.
I will also just thumbs up and stress the idea of building a strong rapport with your high school college counselor, because as you mentioned, they actually do have to write some form of a recommendation letter, though I'm not sure what the difference between that is specifically in terms of content with the academic recommendation letter. But either way, that is super important. And yeah, I remember I transferred to a public school my last 2 years of high school, so I got even less time to get to know my college counselor. So I think an important aspect of building that rapport, and it kind of goes along with something you mentioned earlier, Edward, but is just meeting often with your college counselor, whether it's grabbing lunch or just stopping by their office to say hi, or just getting to know them as people, because that in itself just helps you to build that relationship. As you mentioned, they're also people. So yeah. Could you describe what campus life is like at Brown? Is Greek life at all a part of that? What do you do on the weekends? I guess share what your experience at Brown is like.
Yeah, so Greek life is really not a thing at all at Brown. If you're interested in Greek life, I would not apply.
That's good to know, yeah.
Yeah, like, you know, I realize that sounds like a little bit too harsh, but like, yeah, like Greek life is maybe something like 7 or 8% of the student body. So it's like pretty uncommon. It's not to say that the people who do like frats and sororities on campus like don't have a good time. I'm sure they have a great time, but like it's definitely not the same culture as say like a Dartmouth where that's like something that everybody does. And like incidentally, like that was something that I knew during the application process and like took into consideration because like I didn't want to be on a campus with like a lot of Greek life. It's not really like my scene. I think overall like the Brown community is like sort of like somewhat fiercely independent. I think like broadly speaking, people are skeptical about like large organizations, like and stuff like that. So you'll, yeah. So there's not quite like structure in that way. So you'll have to like kind of find your own friend groups through clubs, or activities, or through your major and stuff like that. In terms of like what like life was like on campus, like I don't think it's drastically different than like what life would be like at most like colleges. Like people went out on the weekends, people partied, like had a pretty good time. But I think there was a bit of a like subversive element to a lot of that. We had like a lot of really interesting cultural traditions at Brown, some of which have actually been banned since like I went to college. Yeah, and I'm not going to dive too deep into that right now because it might not be appropriate for this conversation. But Brown is a very interesting culture on campus.
Harvard too, I would say that. And same thing with Greek life at Harvard. It was allowed previously, but I think sometime in my junior year, Harvard made the move to ban all single gender organizations. They wanted the clubs and different extracurriculars on campus to be more inclusive. I won't speak too much about that, but that Greek life, although it still exists at Harvard, it's also decreasing over time. So if that's something that any viewers
Yeah.
here find they really want to be a part of their college experience, Harvard and Brown are probably not the schools for you.
Yeah, that was definitely something that sort of changed over my time at Brown too. Like, I think when I was a freshman, it wasn't popular by any stretch of the imagination. Like, again, it's only like 7 or 8%, but they felt like they had a bigger like presence on campus. But there was unfortunately like a sexual assault scandal that happened after my freshman year that like kind of like changed things a lot. And like the campus administration was like very serious about cracking down on that. So like, yeah, so it just became like an even smaller part of the culture.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's not to say all Greek life is inherently bad or abusive in any way. It's just localized to these schools, the different instances, there is a sort of correlation there. That being said, as you mentioned, Dartmouth has a huge Greek life aspect. I know UC Berkeley does as well. So again, it varies from school to school. So any viewers preparing to apply to college, be sure to do a deeper dive if, again, Greek life is important to you. Because even though it may exist at Brown or may exist at Harvard, it's not going to be a huge part of the social scene on campus. Let me ask a pretty interesting question that students have also been asking me since I graduated from Harvard, which is obviously has a huge reputation. I have my own opinions on the quality of education at Harvard compared with other Ivy Leagues. But that being said, I'm also curious to hear about your POV if you've ever experienced something like imposter syndrome while at Brown and how you dealt with that or how you have seen your friends deal with that, if that's something that you haven't personally experienced.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Yeah, no, I definitely have dealt with imposter syndrome. I think I think the experience of a lot of people in high school, especially if they're good students, it can feel like you're a big fish in like a small pond. So like, you know, you're pretty much at the top of your class. You're like good at a lot of things. So like, I think being the person who shifts from that environment to an environment where like there are tons and tons of smart people, like pretty much everybody is like amazing in like their own way, can be like pretty jarring because all of a sudden like you're one, you know, smaller medium-sized fish among like many small or medium-sized fish in like a pretty like large like lake or ocean or something. So yeah, no, it's definitely jarring. And like, you know, I dealt with like a lot of imposter syndrome and also like flat out jealousy when I was in college, especially my like earlier years when I'm like, oh man, like that person is so talented, like they're so good at that, like I'm never gonna be able to catch up, like what am I even doing here? Additionally, like frankly speaking, there were lots of like personal issues, right? Because like I was coming from a first gen, like fairly working class background, but a school like Brown has like a very long institutional history that's like longer than the history of the United States, and there are lots of like very, very, very wealthy families that send their children to school. And like it can often feel like that campus is not really made for you. And like, you know, I think there are definitely like very different social circles, like some, you know, with like the very like wealthy students who come from very elite families, and others from like, you know, more working class families. But ultimately, you know, it comes down to finding the people that like make you feel good about yourself, finding the people who, you know, lift you up and like will grow with you. And yeah, it's ultimately about like the sort of like core personalities. I think that my best friends at Brown are like very different from me, like very different in background. We're all from different parts of the country. We come from different levels of like socioeconomic background. We study different things. We work in different like fields now. But like, you know, like at the end of the day, like I really like their values, and like I really like them as people, and like they treat me very well, and I hope that I was a like good friend to them. And yeah, it's ultimately about like becoming confident in your own skin and feeling good about yourself, and like realizing that like, you know, even though there are tons of incredible people out there that succeed in like all these different ways, like you are also a valuable person, and like while your like success might not be recognized in like the same way or like the most public way, you still do have a lot to offer.
So I know we are getting towards the end of the interview, but I also wanted to leave room for you to share any other words of encouragement or even advice you may have for any of my viewers. And again, no worries if you don't have anything. I just want to make sure there is space for that.
Sure. I think what I would leave the viewers with is, you know, I know if you're in high school right now, college can seem like the biggest thing in the world. And frankly, you know, like it is an important thing because like, you know, you want to go to a good school that's a good fit for you as a person, that will like put you in a good spot to like learn and succeed and like set you up for future success. But at the end of the day, like college is not the end all be all of life. You know, like I work with people who went to like a whole range of different schools, some of which are like kind of similar to like the experiences that I had, some of which are like very different. But like college does not, you know, determine your value as like a person. And like, you know, like if you don't get into the school of your dreams, which I think is like an experience that like a lot of people have, honestly, because like each year the college application process gets more competitive, but like the number of seats is still like roughly what it has always been. You know, and you're going to have to make like some tough choices potentially when you're sort of choosing which school you like want to go to, and like evaluate some trade-offs. But it really is an experience where like you can make it whatever you want it to be. You know, you know, you'll have the chance to meet a bunch of great people wherever you are, and like you'll have the chance to build solid friendships and great relationships that you can carry with throughout the rest of your life. But at the end of the day, like, you know, people diverge in like a number of different directions. Like some people will go to grad school, so they'll have the chance to go through the process all over again. Other people, you know, will just like never look back after college, and like that's also fine. Some people will transfer during school if they find that the fit like isn't perfect at their first school. So ultimately, like I would just want the viewers to like keep an open mind about the whole experience, and like try not to view it as like a life or death situation. You know, really try to take a bit of a growth mindset. At the end of the day, as long as you're moving in the right direction, as long as you're learning and growing, that's about as much as we can ask for.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Edward, for your time and also for all the insights you shared. I know there are also some questions that got a little bit more personal, for instance, about your experience as a first-gen student or even dealing with imposter syndrome. But on behalf of the viewers, I really do want to thank you not only for your time, but also your openness and honesty and willingness to be vulnerable to guide these students. Again, the whole reason why I wanted to do or start College Lead is because I, throughout my time in high school, found that there is a sort of barrier to entry to good college prep resources. So I hope that this series will be able to answer many questions that I may not be able to answer just from my own perspective. So thank you so much, Edward. And yeah, to all the viewers who have made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. If you found this video helpful and would like to see more content like this, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe. And I will see you guys in the next episode of Campus Conversations with College Lead. Thank you.